football. The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, it is once again the day after Selection Sunday, the traditional airing of the grievances. Here's one grievance I don't have. Start times for the local teams in the NCAA tournament. AU is playing on Wednesday night in Dayton against Mount St. Mary's for the right to face top seed Duke on Friday. That's a 6:35 start. And I was really fearing the Maryland start time since they're playing in Seattle. Good news for me today. 4:35 start on Friday against Grand Canyon for the right to beat the winner of the Memphis-Colorado State game and the chance to get to the Sweet 16. But a lot of things are being talked about today in relation to the team that got screwed the most. And the consensus seems to be Indiana. My son went to Indiana. He's as big an Indiana fan as I know. But I don't think he's that broken up about this. They're now looking for a coach. Mike Woodson agreed to, quote-unquote, step down at the end of the year. He's an alum, played for Bobby Knight, great player there. Did a good job, but this year did well under expectations when they spent a lot of money in the portal. So they're looking for somebody to take that spot. Now, Dusty May was on the radar at Michigan, and Michigan quickly signed him to an extension. And Dusty May's team did a really good job in winning the Big Ten tournament yesterday and beating Maryland in just an incredible game on Saturday, where you had the modern version of Tyus Edney going the length of the floor as Michigan won on a layup at the end of the game by Trey Donaldson. But I think he's probably happy that he's staying there, though Indiana, if you win, I mean, that's one of the bluest of blue blood jobs. Bobby Knight made it that way in the 1970s and the early 1980s. So there is that. But who they get is going to be interesting. The Maryland situation, we'll get to that. It's funny. Last year when Maryland missed the tournament with a sub-500 record, 16-17, there's a lot of grumbling about Kevin Willard. Like, Kevin Willard, he's got Maryland. He's supposed to have them certainly in the tournament. He can't have a losing record. Team couldn't shoot. And then this year, because of the way the portal works and the NIL, he totally redid the roster. They got guys who can shoot, and they're a 4 seed. And they've got a chance as a 4 seed to get to the Sweet 16. Very good chance, I would say. And beyond that, who knows? But they haven't been to the Sweet 16 since 2016. So this would be a real opportunity for them to establish a program that's, back to the days where Gary Williams had it, making the tournament 11 straight years, going to back-to-back Final Fours and winning the national championship in 2002. And all of a sudden, and this is the way things change, you can change yourself from a horribly shooting team one year with a sub-500 record to a 4 seed the next with a starting 5 that shoots the ball about as well as any team in the country. So it's just bizarre the way the game works. As a matter of fact, Steve Alford, former great player at Indiana, won a national championship there in 1987 and has bumped around different places coaching. He's now at Nevada. He gave about a 3-minute speech on this over the weekend about the state of college basketball, and we'll get to that in about 20 minutes. But, again, the number one grievance right now seems to be that Indiana got in. West Virginia may have gotten in, according to some, should have gotten in. They had a player who was injured, and that might have been a factor in keeping them out. That often happens, in the NCAA tournament. His name is Tucker DeVries, and the feeling was that they wouldn't be as good. Though here's the thing about North Carolina: they had only what they call quad 1 wins. They were 1-12 in quad 1, and people looked at that one, and they also looked at this. That the head of the selection committee is Bubba Cunningham. Where does Bubba Cunningham work? Why, he works at North Carolina. He's the athletic director there. And Bubba Cunningham gets a $100,000 bonus if North Carolina makes the NCAA tournament. That's a crazy clause in the contract because if you're the athletic director at North Carolina, you're supposed to have your team in the NCAA tournament, and you're supposed to have a team that's capable of competing for the championship. They're going to be in the play-in. They're going to have to play this week as they go to Dayton on Tuesday, and they will play San Diego State, team that made the Final Four a couple of years ago, for the right to move on and see if they can pull off a miracle run. But they would play Ole Miss on Thursday if they were able to pull off a victory. So anyway, with what looks like a very much of a conflict of interest, although they've gone out of their way not to do that, not to make that look like that, Keith Gill, who is the vice chairman of the selection committee, appeared with Bubba Cunningham after the brackets were announced on CBS, and Seth Davis asked this question.
You guys go to great lengths to make sure there are no conflicts of interest. You are the athletic director of the University of North Carolina in your day job, so it's going to be a natural question for people who don't know all those procedures to ask whether North Carolina may have gotten a little bit of an advantage that their AD is a chair. So I'm going to invite you to answer that question, and then maybe if Keith could shed some light on that discussion.
Well, thanks, Seth. And obviously, I'm going to defer that to Keith. But, all the policies and procedures were followed, and Keith can address exactly how North Carolina was discussed, because I was not in the room for any of that.
Yeah, thanks, Bubba. And Seth, I appreciate the question. As the vice chair, I managed all the conversations that we had about North Carolina, and we had quite a few. Our policies require the AD of any school to recuse themselves and actually leave the room for those discussions. And they're not allowed to participate in any vote as well. So we followed those, had lots of discussions about North Carolina. Saturday night, we took our final vote, and we voted in 4 teams in the field on Saturday night, and we had a contingency vote. And the contingency vote, that was the last team in the field. And it was based on Memphis and UAB. If Memphis won that game, then that was going to free up a spot in the tournament, and that was going to be North Carolina. If UAB had won, then Memphis was going to be in the tournament, UAB would have been in the tournament, and North Carolina would have been the first team out. And so that process played out today. Memphis won, and that put North Carolina in the field.
So the explanation is that Indiana really never had a shot. It came down to the UAB-Memphis championship game in the conference tournament, and since Memphis won, Memphis, of course, gets in. They were going to be in anyway, and now it frees up a spot, so North Carolina gets it and Indiana doesn't. You can argue the merits. Quad one win for North Carolina. The record for Indiana was 4-13 in Quad 1. They've got all different types of criteria that they look at, and I'm sure the carping can go on forever. But the only thing I would say about this is it's 68 teams, and it's probably going to be 76 next year. And there's always going to be complaining. Do better in the regular season. Don't leave it up to the committee to try and make this determination. Now, look, there have been teams that have been in the play-in, and they get to the Final Four. It's happened. I think VCU did that one year. There may have been another team that I think there's been more than one that's made it from the play-in. So you could say, okay, if Indiana gets in the play-in, maybe they get on a run. But again, that's why they play all these regular season games. You got to have a better regular season record, and you don't need to be sitting on the bubble on Selection Sunday. That's my feeling. I mean, I go back to the days when Maryland, and they made a documentary about this, the team that changed college basketball, the 1974 final in the ACC between North Carolina State and Maryland. NC State won by 2 in overtime. They got to the NCAA tournament. They wound up winning it. They beat UCLA, which had a 7 consecutive streak of winning championships. They knocked them out in the semifinals in overtime and then beat Marquette for the championship. And Maryland didn't get to compete. They were a team that came within a whisker of beating the eventual national champs in the ACC championship game, but in those days only one went. And the next year they started adding at-large teams. They got to 32. They got to 48. They got to 64. It should have stopped there, but they couldn't help themselves. So now it's 68. It's going to be 76. And all the complaining that's going on in various places around the country today, I don't really shed much of a tear for you because you got a chance. You got plenty of chances. And if you don't get it done, you can get it done in the conference tournament. And we've had teams from smaller conferences make it with losing records from the regular season because they just got hot at the right time. So that's the way I look at that. As for the Maryland reaction, a 4 seed, which I think was very, very pleasing after they went out in that shocking game against Michigan in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament. I would say to get a 4 seed, they'd have to be pretty happy about that. And Kevin Willard did seem pretty chippy yesterday. Chipper, I should say, not chippy, but chipper, although he does seem to have a proverbial chip on his shoulder. A little bit chipper about making it as a 4 seed.
Excited. Obviously disappointed with how we ended the game and really how we played. We didn't play overly well yesterday, but I thought Michigan played really well. But for this group to sacrifice, a lot of guys had to sacrifice roles to come together, to put this team together in 2 weeks, and for them to kind of, come together and get back into the big dance. It's exciting.
And a guy like Julian, who's been with you the whole way, your thoughts on him being able to do this again?
Yeah, I mean it's what we talked about. It's what we talked about at the beginning of this year. That was his goal. He wanted to graduate from Maryland, and he wanted to help us get back to the big dance. And obviously, anybody that's watched us all year realizes that he's as big a reason for that as anything.
How hard is it for you, just as a competitor, to have to flush yesterday and just keep it moving?
It got flushed at 5 o'clock. I haven't slept yet, and it was hard because it's our fourth one in a row. The way we've lost, I'd almost rather get blown out, to be honest with you. To fight back from being down 15, to take the lead, and then obviously have some defensive breakdowns at the end. But as my wife said, she goes, once 5 o'clock, you got to recognize and you got to be ready to be excited about the second season. And 5 o'clock hit, I let it go. I'm super excited now, and I'm excited about this team. I'm excited about going out west. I think it's, we've done it once before, so I'm excited to get back out there again.
What, if anything, will you take from that mid-season road trip to the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, I think the only thing we're going to change a little bit is our travel time. We got out there really late last time, and I thought the next day would kind of affect us a little bit. But as far as going out there, I think it's what's great about the Big Ten Conference is, we've been out west. We've traveled out there. So this is not new. This is nothing that we have to adjust to. The guys are excited about it. Seattle's a great town. So to get this opportunity to go back out there again, I think it's a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, last time they were out there didn't go well. They lost to Washington, which was one of the worst teams in the country. They lost 75-69 on January 2nd as part of a two-game swing through the Northwest, and I believe they lost at Oregon as well. So this time they hope for better results. They hope to go 2-0 rather than 0-2, and we'll see what happens once they get started on Friday afternoon. As for the seeding, as for getting a 4 seed, this was Willard on that.
If we had gotten to the finals against Wisconsin, I think we would have had a good shot for a 3. But again, I'm not complaining about 4. I think it's a great opportunity for us.
Also, 8 Big Ten schools made the field. A couple were just on the outside of the bracket. Your thoughts on?
Yeah, I haven't dove into it yet, but Indiana definitely deserved to be into the tournament. I think the job Mike did, rallying his team, the way they played at the end of the year, winning at Michigan State, home versus Purdue. I think it's tough. I think Indiana deserved to be in.
Yeah, and you stump for your conference. I think another thing with North Carolina getting in, it's shocking when you see the SEC with 14 teams and the ACC, which for most of my life has been the college basketball conference in the country, with the blue bloods of Duke and North Carolina and Maryland being competitive. And, we've even had a year where Georgia Tech has made it to the final. Clemson, these schools have really been the story of college basketball for half a century. And the league is just so down this year. Duke's a number 1 seed, yeah, for sure. But to get only 4 teams in, and arguably maybe should have been 3, That's really a stunning development, but it has a lot to do with the NIL and the way things work. And the SEC is a conference that's just swimming in money because of football. And so they got a few shekels in the cushions of the couch, and they threw it at basketball. And here we are. As for how his team is feeling and how they're looking at it off this, stunning loss, and they've had 4 buzzer-beating losses, this season. 4 buzzer. I was at one of them, Michigan State. What happened against Michigan in the Big Ten tournament, what happened at Ohio State, and what happened at Northwestern earlier this year. But that all shaken off, veteran team. This is how Willard's looking at it heading to Seattle.
They're extremely confident in their individual skills, but I think we've talked a lot about as a staff and as a team together about the importance of having a team attitude. And I think these guys have built a very strong team attitude where they believe in each other and they're going to work for each other. And I started seeing it. The biggest change I saw in this team was after the Ohio State loss. It's the second buzzer beater. We just come off Northwestern. And they bounced back and we got on a roll. And then Michigan State happens. And then these guys could have folded it up after Michigan State. And when you go at Penn State and get a win that we had to get. And then we went, where did we go after Penn State? Oh, Michigan, and win at Michigan. So I think this team has developed, some of the setbacks that we've had, the 4 buzzer beaters, the tough loss at Purdue, I think it's helped kind of sharpen their attitude more than anything.
Well, we'll see. I mean, do they use that to help overcome that, or do they go, it's 5 seconds left in the game, and the opponent has the ball, and we've been here before, and we've watched what happened. Oh my God, hide your eyes. That's what the beauty of March is, right? That's what this tournament is all about. The contract stuff, and this popped up, I guess, on Saturday when Villanova fired their coach, and Kevin Willard's name was mentioned as a possible replacement. There's Ryan Odom, who's really an interesting story, too. He's the first coach ever to pull off the 16-1 upset when he was at UMBC and they beat Virginia. And he won at Utah now, and he's got his team back in winning the tournament yesterday in the A-10 here at Capital One Arena, knocking off George Mason. He may be a candidate as well. But Maryland, off what they did this year. Now, I don't know what the climate would be last year if Willard's name was mentioned for the Villanova job. But now the report is they're going to make him one of the top-paid coaches in the country. Obviously, that question had to be asked yesterday.
What I can tell you is Damon Evans and I, he hired me. We're on the same page of what we want to do for this program, what we want to do for this university. His focus and my focus are exactly the same. So our focus right now is strictly the NCAA tournament and this team. But all I can say to that is that me and Damon are on the same page, and we always have been.
Kind of a non-answer answer. And this is the way the game works in college basketball. You use these things, these reports that you're desired by another place to get a better contract. And good for Kevin Willard, because there's no rush to do this. He's under contract from 2027, 2028. So he's got another, 4 years left on his deal? I don't think there's any rush to do this, but I guess the buyout is reasonable enough that if Villanova wanted to pay it, they could do it. So Willard is using this. And who knows? They may not come to an agreement, and he could still wind up at Villanova. But meantime, they got the NCAA tournament to play. Gary Williams, when he had Maryland in the Final Four, I forget which year it was, might have been 01 or 02. I think it was first time. First time was 01. And he gets there, and his name is being mentioned for the UNLV job. And the money then, 24 years ago, is not what it is now. And he has said that it was the kind of offer that he would have considered if his team wasn't where they were. So, he knew he couldn't be negotiating a contract while Maryland's getting ready to play in the Final Four. And, once they started winning like that and winning the national championship, I'm sure he was heftily rewarded. But at that time, UNLV was prepared to pay him a really significant amount of money. Might have been when they got rid of Rolly Massimino. I'm not sure. But that's the way the game is played. You use the leverage of your name being mentioned in other places to get more money. and I think it's ultimately going to be worked out here. I got some more from Dwayne Simpkins coming up shortly. Dwayne Simpkins, the coach at AU, they're in, of course, because they won the Patriot League tournament. And, as a 16, which we knew they were going to be, I thought maybe they'd get a shot to play, now the way they do this now with these play-ins, two of the two play-in winners, I guess, go and play I guess the way it works is two of the four play-in winners play number one seeds. And I was hoping that AU wasn't going to be one of them so that they could get a chance to play a top seed. But they do have an opportunity here. And if they beat Mount St. Mary's on a Wednesday night in Dayton, they would get to play number one Duke. Dwayne Simpkins is in no position to complain about this for sure, and he seems to be pretty certain about playing Mount St. Mary's and the mental preparation he had for the seeding announcement.
I had a sneaking suspicion we were going to play Mount St. Mary's, but nonetheless, to see it pop up on the screen, it took me back some 30 years ago, I guess, when I was playing at Maryland, and it just no feeling like that.
Yeah, I mean, he was part of that resurgence at Maryland. After the Bob Wade disaster, they bring Gary Williams in 1989. 1990, they made the tournament, but then they were told 1991, or 1990, I guess, in 91, they weren't going to be allowed in postseason play. And then 92, he brings in this freshman class that includes Dwayne Simpkins. They don't make the tournament that year. I think they had a winning record, but they didn't have the resume to get in. And then he makes it as a sophomore for the first time, and that team actually went to the Sweet 16. That was the Joe Smith freshman team, and Simpkins was the point guard. And their coming out party was that Thanksgiving weekend game against Georgetown, where he had the game-winning shot in overtime. And that really relaunched the program under Gary Williams. So he's doing it now as a coach, done a great job at AU, and they're going to get started on Wednesday night in the play-in. Coming up, Steve Alford with the, I think, cloudy forecast for college basketball. He'll give you the picture as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, coming up later this hour, Tim Kirkjian, who is, I think, the best baseball historian maybe ever, but certainly what we have now. He's got his all St. Patrick's Day team. Tim does a podcast with his son, and he put this out on Twitter, and it's pretty funny. Happy St. Patrick's Day, by the way. I've been down in spring training many years on St. Patrick's Day, and it's really cool. In fact, one year, I think the Reds, the red team, team that's named after a color, came out in all green uniforms. Yeah, it's that funny stuff. Anyway, it always mixes in with March Madness and the NCAA tournament, and it's a lot different than the way it used to be. I remember, I forget the guy's name, but there was a guy who would come forward every year about this time. He played at Duke, and he said, we can get these players paid, and here's how we do it. You get to both teams before the championship game, and you say, we're going to boycott this game unless there's an agreement to pay the players. And that was dismissed. That's nonsense. Then nobody would throw away a chance to play in the NCAA championship game, and then nobody did. And over the years, the NCAA continued to fight and fight and fight against the idea of paying the players. And finally, about 3 or 4 years ago, went to the Supreme Court, and they looked at it and they said, what are you talking about here? You guys are making billions. You got coaches, $10 million salaries, and the players are getting nothing? Hello, that's called slavery. And everything has basically imploded, and this is the state of college basketball now, as explained very well by Steve Alford, veteran coach, great player, played at Indiana, helped them win a national championship, 1987. He's bounced from place to place. He was at UCLA for some time. He's now at Nevada. They didn't make the tournament, but this was Alford explaining how college basketball works in 2025.
5 years ago, I wasn't, on conversation saying how much you want to be paid. Never thought that would happen in college basketball. And I've always been a big proponent as the game and money has evolved and changed. I've never been one that said I don't believe student athletes shouldn't be paid. But the way it is now is ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. and it's changed our game. And so you got to adapt. We got to adapt, but every coach, every handshake I have now before games, that's brought up. Every game. Me and the opposing coach are going to talk about portal issues. And, where's academics at? Like, I've talked to my compliance guys. What's APR anymore? You can't control APR. It's a JUCO. You're going to replace 8-9 guys to a roster every year. The travel time that is across the country in these leagues. It makes no sense for that to be our model, but that is our model. So more than us, do we have to evolve as coaches? Yeah, we got to evolve of how now we recruit. Like, it used to be, hey, what's my degree going to look like? What's your facilities look like? What's your relationship with the team look like? Are you there for all practices? Are you a coach that dives into relationships and you're going to care for my child? You might as well throw all that stuff out, because the only question they're concerned about is what they're getting paid in the portal. And to me, that's a terrible model for an 18-year-old, because truth be told then, a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds are raising family members now, and that's not what you go off to college for. That's just not. And so that's frustrating, because I don't like our model at all. I don't know how that's going to change now that the genie's out of the bottle, but you asked me a pertinent question, and I don't like the model that we currently have, because it's not name, image, and likeness. That's not what it is. There's not that many college players that have that eval as a name, image, and likeness. Most of them are getting what they're getting before they ever produce, and that's not what you should have to produce, then you receive. It's a bad lesson, and we shouldn't be sending kids off to college academically or in our profession to teach them bad models for when they're 25 and 26. Like, I got 5 players now. NIL's done in 2 months. What happens to them? Are they going to be able to handle the real world now after having NIL for a couple of years at Nevada or wherever they've been? Are they going to really be prepared to handle the things that, oh, I'm not getting that money. I have to go earn that money? We're not really teaching them that. And I think that's something that people way above me have to really look at, because the NCAA and collegiate athletics should be about teaching life lessons, period, through athletics.
It ain't that way anymore. That's Steve Alford, the Nevada coach. A couple of takeaways there. Number one, where he mentioned APR, that's a term I haven't heard in a long time. I think it goes back about 30 years. And the NCAA got concerned about academics. So this was a way of measuring. I don't know if there are any penalties in this. There may have been. But the academic progress report. And Maryland actually ranked a little bit lower. And part of the reason was that Gary Williams was losing guys early to the NBA, guys like Steve Francis and Joe Smith, and I think he lost a couple of other guys with at least 1 year of eligibility left to go. And he said, look, you too would leave school if you got a multi-million-dollar contract. And over the years, I guess it was discussed, it was measured, but here's Alford, he throws it out there. Yeah, I've forgotten that even exists. Academic progress. Oh, yeah. Isn't that why they go to college? Not anymore. And he says this is what recruiting is all about. How much are you going to pay me? Now, I guess it's cut down on the number of home visits you have to make. I guess everything can be done by Zoom, and it's just a transactional thing. They don't bother to visit the school or look at the library. Lefty used to tell them about how great the ice cream was at the dairy. I don't think they do that anymore. They can buy a cow. They can buy a dairy. Some of them with the money they make. No, I'm exaggerating there, but and also on the name, image, and likeness. Remember this: when Jay Billis 20 years ago was advocating for this name, image, he didn't call it name, image, and likeness, but he said, "Look, if you're a music student, you're on a music scholarship, and I know that Indiana has a great music department, for example, and you'd like to put out a CD of your music and sell it." You can do that. There's no penalties for that. If you're a college basketball player and you're invited to, say, a car dealership on a Saturday and you're paid $300 to sign autographs, that's a violation. Can't do that. And that's what I thought name, image, and likeness would be. that you would go to school on a scholarship and you would establish yourself as a player, and then you would cash in on your ability. Be free to do that, just like a music student would, and there wouldn't be any problem with that. Well, that's gone away. I thought, man, once they put in name, image, and likeness, we're going to see a glut of commercials with these players. You rarely see one. Occasionally, Deion Sanders' kids get spots, but that's because of Deion. And, it's all about how much money are you going to pay me. It's the model. And Kevin Willard said it at the beginning of the year. The system is broken. Now, he's getting paid a lot of money, and he's apparently going to get a lot more money to stay now that he's on the list for Villanova. But he's telling you, this isn't what we signed up for here. We're doing this, and we're putting out a product. And this is one of the things I want to ask Gary Williams about on Wednesday, how much the product has either declined or has changed in a way that really isn't the college basketball model that some of us enjoyed 20 years ago, or back in the day, like when you knew the players year to year. And I think that's another thing that's kind of cut down on this day. We know the names of the schools, but we really don't know the players. There's a handful of players around the country that are known. Like Auburn is the number one seed. Off the top of my head, I can't name a single player. Right? and you used to be able to name Duke's starting lineup, Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill. Yeah, that's all gone. That's totally gone. Whether it's a big negative, I don't know. But as Alford said, this is the system. The system is broken, but this is the system that we have. A little football here. What are the Steelers doing? And what are the Giants doing? And it looks like both of them are in this bizarre waiting game that seems to go on every year with Aaron Rodgers. Mike Tannenbaum, former GM of the Jets and of the Dolphins, he was on the Dan Patrick Show on Friday, and it was like, S on the pot or get off, right? So here was his take on how the Steelers should approach the Rodgers situation.
Take you into Omar Khan, GM of the Steelers. Look, Aaron, we are signing Russell Wilson today. Like, you don't have to worry about reading about it, hearing about it from your agent. I am giving you the answers to the test. If you do not sign by close of business today, you will be reading that Russell Wilson is a Steeler, and you're either going to be backing up J.J. McCarthy or you're going to be in MetLife. And let me ask you a question, Aaron. When was the last time there was a Giant quarterback since Eli Manning that went to the Giants and it worked out well? So the decision is happening today. We love you. We want you, but we have to run our team in our best interest, and we're giving you all the information.
Yeah, and the latest is that Rodgers may be now talking to the Minnesota Vikings, where I guess he could conceivably be in a position where he's got to compete for the job with J.J. McCarthy. I'll tell you this. This, I don't think, would be a Kevin O'Connell move. He's the coach. He seems to do well with quarterbacks that he makes better. I don't think Hall of Fame quarterbacks walking in are what he's really all about. And I'll tell you this about veteran guys. Veteran guys who want to play know how to play mind games with young guys and totally throw them off. And I bet you Aaron Rodgers would certainly know how to play mind games with J.J. McCarthy if they're competing for a job. I would not do that if I were the Minnesota Vikings. And if I were Aaron Rodgers, I'd pick either the Giants or the Steelers and move on. But that's not the way he does it. He does this long, drawn-out, dramatic act. And, well, you saw what it did to the Jets. We'll see what it does to whichever team signs him. And then this was cool over the weekend. Javon Kinlaw, one of the free agent signings by the Commanders. He was with Adam Peters in San Francisco. They drafted him in 2017. He had some injuries, wound up with the Jets last year, but he's coming home. Now, this isn't how they used to do business. Like, I believe that a big reason that they took the late Dwayne Haskins at number 15 when the coaching staff didn't want him, I say they, meaning Dan Snyder, he went to school with his kid at Bullis, and he thought, local guy makes good for my team, good for the draw, the whole thing. That's not why they signed Javon Kinlaw, but he is a local guy. He grew up in D.C. The last Redskin to live in the District of Columbia was George Stark, who finished his career 40 years ago. So the connection between the city of D.C. and the team, and with whatever may be going on with the stadium and the negotiations there, I don't think this had a thing to do with it. But David Aldridge, who's a D.C. native, grew up in the city, has lived here all of his life, he had a nice little conversation with Kinlaw at his news conference on Friday.
Hold up, Kinlaw.
What's up,
I grew up 20th and Perry in Northeast. Where did you grow up?
If you know, you know. I grew up on 4th Street Northeast, down there on Rhode Island. If you know, you know.
We real neighbors then. All right,
you know,
man.
you know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hey, look. How much were people aware this past season of the change in DC? Was it something that you would watch a game and you go, damn, they look like they're really together?
For sure. Talk of the town, you know. Everybody talking about the Commanders, you know. And shoot, man, I'm just happy to be here, bro. It ain't even about the wins, the losses. It's about the belief. And these people, they believe in me over here, bro. They believe in me. You know, they see the progression every year. I'm looking to get better. Every year I've gotten better, and I'm going to continue to get better. And I'm just happy that it's here, that I get to showcase.
Yeah, and as a DC guy, this is kind of a cool. You always keep up with your hometown. So this was Kinlaw about what he's hearing from other players around the league.
I mean, where can I start? Like I keep saying, like everybody, like, man, they play hard, super physical. They're gonna give you their best. They're gonna give you their best shot, no matter who it is. And that's really it, though. Like, you're gonna have to strap it up when you play against the Commanders, man. And I love being on that type of team where you know you got to come to play. You know what I mean?
So, welcome home, Javon Kinlaw. Grew up in Northeast, back in the D.C. area. I'm still not a DMV sayer. I'm old enough, spent most of my life here, and it's always, to me, going to be the Washington metropolitan area. But I understand DMV, and I understand how people use that term, and he's now, I guess, as the kids say, back in the DMV. Coming up in the next hour, we'll take a further look at the Maryland matchup against Grand Canyon, and more from Jim Lampley and his new book and how he became the premier sideline reporter, morphing into one of the best broadcasters of all time. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I have been to a lot of different news conferences over the years, and sometimes the questions are ridiculous. Sometimes the answers are ridiculous. Sometimes the answers are angry. But there was an exchange after Maryland beat Illinois on Friday night between Kevin Willard and a reporter that you're going to want to hear. This is one for the books. I'd gotten a lot of play on social media, but picked it up, and I want to play that for you later this hour as we are now in the airing of the grievances with the brackets coming out yesterday, Selection Sunday. Who was left out? A lot of grumbling from Bloomington, Indiana, from Morgantown, West Virginia. North Carolina got in, and the head of the selection committee, Bubba Cunningham, is the athletic director there. He gets a $100,000 bonus every time they make the tournament. He said he recused himself from the room. I'm sure he did. But, they know he's the head of the selection committee. And, North Carolina, an NCAA tournament without North Carolina, how many times has that happened in the past 60 years? I don't know the number, but it probably hasn't been that often. So they were close this year. They supposedly were the last team in. It came down to the UAB Memphis final in the conference championship game. Memphis won. That opened up a spot. They got in, and according to the selection committee, Indiana would not have made it. West Virginia would not have made it. North Carolina, with a 23-13 record and with only what they call one quad win, 1-12, and top quad wins, is in the NCAA tournament. Is what it is. As for Maryland, I don't think they can be too unhappy after getting beat at the buzzer again. I mean, it's. I don't think I've seen a season like this. Now, on one hand, off the Michigan game from Saturday, you could say, well, they were down 15 points. They did a hell of a job in coming back. They actually took the lead on a Derek Queen free throw. They were up by 1, but somehow they allowed Trey Donaldson to drive the length of the court like Tyus Edney and makes the game-winning layup with 0.4 of a second left. Maryland loses 81-80. So you have that, and you have 3 other buzzer-beating losses this year, 2 of them on the road, one against Ohio State, one against Northwestern, and then the Michigan State game, which will forever live in the minds of Maryland fans that they got beat on a 65-footer at the buzzer. Would have gone to overtime, so it was a little bit different than this game. This game, Maryland was up. So if they manage to prevent the score, they win the game. Who knows what happens if that game against Michigan State goes to overtime? Maybe they lose anyway. But the dagger effect of a 65-footer is tough to live with. Anyway, they're moving on. They're a 4 seed. They open up against Grand Canyon, and if they manage to win that, they would play on Sunday against the winner of the game between Memphis and Colorado State. This is the ESPN crew, anchored by Reese Davis. It also has Seth Greenberg on the crew and Jay Williams, and this was their look with Jay Billis of how Maryland stacks up in the tournament. Hold on a second. Let's take 2 on that. This is how Maryland is looking going into the tournament.
We haven't really talked about them a lot because they're in the Big Ten this season. But Maryland looks like they can make a legitimate run here.
And Jacoby Gillespie is a
great
really
transfer.
Good guard.
Yeah.
And third straight tournament appearance for Bryce Drew's Grand Canyon Antelopes. They get in as a 13th seed, and then Memphis and Colorado State. And we talked a little bit about P.J. Haggerty earlier there. Memphis, Maryland, potentially if four more to hold in the second round would be quite a matchup.
Without a doubt, that Maryland team is intriguing to me. Memphis, if they take care of the basketball with P.J. Haggerty and Dane Danger, that's a hard team to play with because they got a guy dynamic off the bounce, and then they got a guy up front you can play through and maybe get Derek Queen in foul trouble because he gets touches.
And they got a bunch of versatile players. It's not just P.J. Haggerty and Tyrese Hunter as the guard if he's back healthy. But with Dane Danger and Moussa Cisse, they've got some guys that can protect the rim. They can throw it inside. But Haggerty, he's not a three-point shooter. He's a downhill guy. He gets into the lane, gets to the basket. He had 42 in the American tournament in one of the games. I mean, he's a bucket getter.
But you know what? That game against Colorado State's not going to be easy. Nate Clifford is one of the most complete players in this tournament. He is a 3-level scorer at 6'6", a wide body, shoots the 3, rebounds it. Absolutely on a tear. Nico Medved, the coach, they run great offense. They take care of the ball. They own the tempo of the game. Colorado State's a tough out.
They beat Virginia in the last tournament appearance.
Like a drum.
But Mountain West teams, first round, regardless of seed, since 2016, 4-15.
And there's one missing from the bracket right now. Boise State.
Now, if you know most of those names that spilled out, you're a hoophead. You got to know your game. But the way that these guys prepare to be able to spit out those names is impressive. I don't know how much they watched them on TV, but I imagine they've at least seen them play. Their former coach, you got one former coach anyway, in Seth Greenberg, and Billis was a grad assistant, and Jay Williams, one of the great players in the history of Duke. So that's their look at Maryland's run here. If you have not been paying attention this year, and it's easy not to because there's so much else going on during the college basketball season until we get to the end of the Super Bowl. But they totally redid their team. Last year they were 16-17, and they brought back only one starter. That's Julian Reese, who is kind of a unicorn now in college basketball, a 4-year player at the same school. And they bring in Derek Queen, who's one of the top high school recruits in the country. He played with Cooper Flagg on a team down in Florida. He's from Baltimore, 6'10", will probably be a lottery pick. Freshman of the year in the Big Ten, 16 points and 11 rebounds. And they also used the transfer portal. And Kevin Willard, when asked about it at the beginning of the season, said, yeah, it's all about money. That's how it works. We were able to come up with the money to get these guys. But these are guys who are not household names. Jacoby Gillespie played at Belmont, okay? Rodney Rice, he's local. He may have been known. He was at Virginia Tech. But with Maryland out of the ACC, you don't see him play as much. He's from Clinton, comes back to his hometown. He was an All-Met at DeMatha, so he's familiar with the area. Rodney Rice, who's been a great three-point shooter for them, set a record with 7 of 9, scored 26 points in the win over Illinois on Friday night. Maryland is third in the Big Ten in three-point field goal percentage, 37%. And they are Gillespie is second in three-point field goal percentage at 41%. All 5 Maryland starters average in double figures. This is, a totally different team than what you saw last year. You don't know the players unless you have a scorecard. That's kind of the way things work today. But this was Kevin Willard yesterday talking about preparing his team to get into the NCAA tournament off this heartbreaking loss that they had on Saturday against Michigan.
This conference has made me a much better coach. It's interesting, as you get older, even though I'm 49, I was still the third youngest coach in this league. To go through this league 3 times now, especially with the other 4 teams we added. Like Dana plays very fast, but plays zone. Mick you're going to grind it out. USC, you're going to see 5, 6, 7 guys on there. To win at Indiana, beat Wisconsin. The amount of styles that you play against in the Big Ten is really what makes this conference so unique. You're going to see Chris Collins. You're going to go home and have to take an ice bath. Same thing with Rutgers, and then we have teams that play really fast. This conference has forced me. Not that I've never tried not to. I always try to get better every year, but this conference has forces you to become a better coach. If not, you will get leveled. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's so many good teams. There's so many good players. And there's so many good coaches. So I think the biggest thing for me is, as I've gotten older, is understanding how to attack the NCAA tournament a little bit better. Trying to build your roster. I think the Big Ten forces you to build your roster in a much different way than maybe I would have in the past, just because of the physicality, the size, the speed, the depth. So I think you're better prepared just by being in this conference.
And getting your team ready for the tournament, what becomes more important this week as far as the little nuances, managing a program, getting things in?
No, I think the biggest thing is I do have a lot of guys that have never been in the NCAA tournament. That's why I love the NCAA tournament. Today was, we're sitting over at the hall, and I'm looking at all these guys, and Derek Queen was like a fat kid in the chocolate factory. He was so giddy and so excited. And Selton's been in college, Jay's been in college, and never been there. To see their excitement, I think I'm going to really bottle that up and let them understand. But we're also still a little pissed off at how we played against Michigan. So we're going to have a little. Am I allowed to say that?
Sure.
We're not live, are we?
No.
Yeah. Don't give me the opportunity to go somewhere else, because my language gets really bad. Okay. But we got a little bit of an edge to us too. We got something to prove, because we just didn't. We're really a bad taste in how we just ended up and played.
It's cool. It's not one of the 7 words that George Carlin said you couldn't say on the air. This is a good setup for Maryland, the NCAA tournament, the way they play. You talk about the Crab 5. Most of the scoring, in fact, almost all the scoring, comes from the starters. They did, in this Big Ten tournament, they did go to the bench. It was thought to be a big advantage going into the Michigan game on Saturday, because it was such a blowout of Illinois that he played his starters like 25 minutes or less. So they were well rested for that. In the NCAA tournament, it's different. The timeouts are longer, and that's why Willard looks at his starting lineup and says, we got a real advantage going in here.
We're unique in that I have 5 guys that need to get the basketball, which is a really good thing, because at any night someone can get you. But our bench has given us great energy. You look at what Jordan Geronimo did against Illinois, him coming in, just changing the whole complexion of the game. Jay gave us great minutes. I think the continuity of the starting 5 is really good. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to get from that starting 5. And you really do tighten your rotation this time of year, just because the TV timeouts become almost 4 minutes. It's amazing how long the TV timeouts are. So I do think that with this rotation, what we have and the way the bench is, that we're in pretty good position.
Last thing from Willard, and we throw this around a lot with the Commanders, culture. And it's odd to talk about this in college basketball, especially these days where you're turning over your roster just about every year. But this is year number 3 for Willard. He came into a program that was in somewhat disarray. They had fired Mark Turgeon during the season, or forced him out. Danny Manning finished up the year, so he comes into, it's not quite a rebuild because he's got some players left, But he had to change things, and he had to go through the pain of last year where they couldn't shoot and had a losing record. And so, it's difficult to say with, very few players on this team are going to be here next year about changing the culture and setting the culture, but this is how Willard looks at it.
I think the way this team played this year is kind of set the standard. And even, I would say my first-year team was the way Jameer played, Dante. I mean, Dante Scott just FaceTimed me. He was in tears about how happy he was. I think I've set the culture here. I love our culture. I love our work ethic. I love that there's so many kids that want to come play for us, that we're turning kids down. So, I like where this program is. I love where the program's going. I love the kids we have in it. March doesn't necessarily define that, but we definitely want to take on March.
Well, yeah, March sort of does define it, really. I mean, that's how you look at your season, unfortunately. I mean, you can have a 3 or 4 loss season, and you go out in the second round of the NCAA tournament, it's a disaster. But getting there is a big part of it, and they were able to do that. And I think he's got to be very pleased with what they did last year. But you basically are starting over every year. It used to be that you had a core of 4-year players who would get better year by year. You might have somebody transferring in or somebody transferring out, and if you're lucky enough, you get a one and done or a guy who's only there for a couple of years, but he's a good enough player that he can get to the NBA. So if you got an NBA player on your team, it's really meaningful. Now, it's gather what you can, and to think that their point guard came from Belmont and has been a key player for them, it just goes to show you where we are in college basketball. And think about this: when you get into the NCAA tournament now, the Cinderellas aren't the Cinderellas anymore, because with the NIL, you can have at a smaller school veteran players who have played, at bigger programs, for example, and have eligibility left, and they can come to you and add that. Or you can also keep guys around longer who might, want to go to another place, and you can come up with enough money to keep them. I mean, the money is all a big part of that. And what Dwayne Simpkins has now at AU, I'm not saying this is a team that's going to pull one of the, incredible upsets in the history of the tournament, that they beat Mount St. Mary's and then somehow knock off top seed Duke. That would be a stunner, though. We've seen Virginia as the number one overall seed go out to a 16. We've seen Purdue as a number one overall seed go out to a 16. So it could happen. But it's I guess, something that you can not only dream about now, but actually think about as somewhat of a possibility. And this was Simpkins talking to Alex Flume yesterday about their matchup with Mount St. Mary's coming up on Wednesday night in the play-in in Dayton, which would mean a matchup with top seed Duke if they can do it.
Yeah, one at a time. I mean, obviously everybody knows who we would face if we were to be fortunate enough to beat Mount St. Mary's, but we've been preaching it all year, just one game at a time. Win the day, get 1% better, and all of our focus and efforts are going to go into preparing for Mount St. Mary's, a formidable team. I just watched them play against Iona on film this morning, and we're going to have our hands full. So, there won't be any looking past them, that's for sure.
How proud are you of this group for what they've accomplished in such a short span of time, to be here in this position, to see their names pop up on that screen? Yeah, it's really rewarding, man. For my staff, we know the hours that we put in. We know the ups and downs that we've had, the disappointments that we had. But we knew, I know I did, that, the idea was to win a championship with this team. We had a lot of veteran leadership. We've had guys that have been here, done that, and we had some good young players as well that come in that are talented. But I felt like if we stayed healthy and had to have some breaks go our way, that we could win this, and here we are. And we've only seen 2 16 seeds ever get past the first round of March Madness. What makes you believe this team could do it?
We've got a tremendous amount of resilience, man. And in today's basketball landscape and college basketball, if you can have a veteran team that is tough and they play together, I firmly believe that you can beat anybody on any given night. Look at Oakland last year, going up against Kentucky. Kentucky had some pros in the team, but they were young. We've got some veteran leadership, and Cooper Flagg maybe not playing will help. So but we'll see. We're going to focus on Mount St. Mary's in the meantime.
Latest is from John Shire that they're targeting Friday for Cooper Flagg to return. They played it safe. Didn't play him in the last 2 rounds of the ACC tournament. They won it anyway, won without him. If he's back, that's an even bigger test for AU, but they got to get there first, and they got to get past Mount St. Mary's on Wednesday. All right, this was from Friday night, and Maryland had a blowout win over Illinois. Got out of hand really early. Kevin Willard was able to rest most of his starters in this game, and the bench, had an opportunity to play, and they kind of cruised to victory. He was in a good mood, obviously, after the game, but this was really something. I don't know where this reporter was from, but this question was asked, and the snarky New Yorkie response from Willard is classic, and it brings back the memory of the late Chris Farley and the famous interview that he did with Paul McCartney, where he said, hey, like, you remember when you were in the Beatles? He goes, yes. He goes, oh, man, that was great. So here is the Chris Farley of sports reporting when he appeared at a news conference hosted by Kevin Willard on Friday night.
It was a 6-4 ball game, and boy, things just seemed like it took off for your ball club then. Rice hit 4 threes. He also had a couple free throws. Reese had a single field goal in there. Bear with me here. And Derek Queen, he just ripped the ball out of the hands of the Illini on a rebound and put it back. And then Geronimo with an offensive rebound.
Are we going to go through the whole box score?
Well, no.
There's got to be. I'm from New York. There's got to be a question.
I'm done. And then Geronimo also with a 3, and it capped off at 23, the 6 run and a 19-point lead. And boy, it seems like you guys just never looked back after that. Sorry for the length of it.
That was a great job describing the game. I got nothing for you. That was great.
Now, maybe he was nervous. I have no idea. But, when you do an interview, well, this isn't really an interview, but it's a news conference, just ask the question. Don't give all the background. He knows what happened. He coached the game. Everybody in the room knows what happened. They watched the game. So he's going through all this sequencing stuff and then Derek Queen, yeah. He said, I got nothing to add to that. So that was fun. Yeah, that was fun from Friday night in Indianapolis. Speaking of Saturday Night Live, as I was with Chris Farley, as I often tell you, the most interesting reading is in the obituary page. I hope you had an opportunity to read some of the obits for John Feinstein. I spent the first hour of the show on Friday talking about him. It's really odd today, I must tell you, it's odd today to pick up the Washington Post or to go online with the Post and not see John's analysis of all 4 regions. He was famous for doing this. He would come into the office on Saturday or Sunday afternoon, maybe get a jump on it Saturday, knowing, pretty much who the top seeds were going to be. But once the brackets would come out at 6 o'clock, he would furiously type previews of all 4 of the regions. And that was like a Monday tradition. You'd look at his rundown of the games, and if you went with everything he said, you probably weren't going to win your bracket. But this was educated analysis. He had watched these teams. He was familiar with the coaches, and he was known for going into an office and somebody would deliver him a pizza. He would demand to have a pizza. John could be like that. And somebody would give him a pizza, and he'd eat the pizza, and by the time the crust was in the box, the previews were out, and it was online, I guess, late in the evening and in the actual newspaper the next morning. And John's presence is certainly missed as we launch another NCAA tournament. I don't know if you're watching the beginning of the selection show yesterday, but they did a really nice tribute to Greg Gumbel, who hosted it for so many years. Didn't do it last year. They said that he had a family illness. Turned out that it was his illness. Sadly, he died of cancer late last year at the age of 78. But those 2 people, when you think of this time of year, they certainly stand out. And they were different, very much different in their makeup, for sure. Greg was, as nice all the time as he possibly could be. He was not confrontational. John could be confrontational. But the thing about the 2 of them was neither one ever big-timed anybody. And I appreciated that very much about both of them. I got to work with Greg for a year and got to know John over 30 years and did some work with him as well. And I really appreciated the way they treated other people. And sad that they're gone. at this time of year. But again, speaking of Saturday Night Live, Ron Nesson passed away at the age of 90. He was a press secretary, and I don't think this would happen under this administration, but he was a former NBC News correspondent, and he was hired by Gerald Ford after he replaced Richard Nixon in 1974 when Nixon resigned in that summer. And he felt, Nesson, being a former reporter, would have more transparency in the administration and everything else. And so in this obit, and I tell you all the time that the most interesting reading is in the obituary page, this one by Brian Murphy, says, during the 1975 edition of the White House Correspondents Association dinner, known for its barbed but mostly good-natured jabs at Washington elite, Chevy Chase did his klutzy Gerald Ford shtick. You remember the early days of Saturday Night Live? He didn't put on makeup like Ford. It was just Chevy Chase falling all the time because Ford had some famous falls, falling down the steps of a plane. He tripped in some other place. He hit somebody with a golf ball. Even though he was a great athlete, he had this klutzy reputation before the days of social media when those things would be played, nonstop. Anyway, he pretended to drop his papers, Ford did, when he got up and spoke, and said, self-deprecating humor is the only kind of humor that goes over in Washington, and that's what it was. And as Nesson said, he won everybody over. Ford invited Chevy Chase to play tennis at the White House. Nesson saw an opportunity, looking ahead to Ford's 1976 election campaign, to remain in office. He began negotiations with Saturday Night Live creator and producer Lorne Michaels. On April 17, 1976, so this would have been in the first year of the show, Nesson was the Saturday Night Live host, introducing a young comedian named Billy Crystal. That's how long ago that was. And Ford, in a pre-recorded video, became the first president to utter the line, live from New York, it's Saturday night. In a sketch playing himself as press secretary with Chase as his boss, Nesson discussed the day's presidential schedule. 6:30 a.m. wake up, 7:05 break the water glass by the sink. The show stirred some complaints about cheapening the dignity of the president, even though Richard Nixon, as a candidate in 1968, appeared on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In with his catchphrase, sock it to me. Many other commentators recognized the significance of politics and pop culture. The Ford appearance on Saturday Night Live became widely regarded as a landmark in modern campaigning. Ford, of course, lost the election in 1976. Nesson's local guy received his bachelor's degree from AU 1956, began his journalism career at the Sentinel, I remember that, and then joined the Washington staff of United Press, where I also worked, and they became United Press International in 1958. So rest in peace, Ron Nesson, who passed away at the age of 90. And also, there was the obit last week of Fred Stolle, who was a great tennis player in a period of time when you had to be an amateur, or at least appear to be an amateur, to play in the Grand Slam tournaments. You wanted to play Wimbledon, U.S. Open, Australian Open, etc. You had to be an amateur. And that's what kept, some of these great players like Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall out of these majors because they were getting paid as professionals. Stolle won an Australian Grand Slam, won 19 Grand Slam titles in the 1960s. He's an Australian, while some of these guys were not, involved. Bob Hewitt, Rod Laver, Ken Rosewall, Roy Emerson, and he earned the nickname Fiery Fred, or just plain Fiery. He was, I guess, John McEnroe before McEnroe. He played his best tennis before the Open era began in 1968, winning 10 Grand Slam titles in doubles and 7 in mixed doubles at a time when professionals were barred. For all his success, Stolle said his proudest moments as a player came in helping to lead Australia to the Davis Cup championship. But here's the real interest. He later became a commentator with ESPN. You may remember him doing matches some years ago. But here's the interesting part. Stolle and his doubles partner, Roy Emerson, longtime partner, had what tennis journalist Bud Collins described as a snooze and booze system in which one of the men would stay out late partying while the other rested up at home preparing for their match the next day. Like, I guess there was one sober player and one hungover. The players took turns cooking steak and eggs for each other, Collins recalled in a 2007 essay, and courted disaster during a tournament on Long Island in 1965 when they broke their routine and stayed out all night. We got to the club just in time for the 11 a.m. match, Stolle recalled. Didn't feel so great, so we jumped in the club pool with our tennis gear on. That woke us up a little anyway, but the first 2 sets nearly killed us. And this was a time, God, they used to have tennis matches like this. This was a time where they did not have tiebreakers. So they wound up winning the match against Americans Jerry Cromwell and Jim Osborne, 2 players who I've never heard of. But they won the first set 24-22. 24-22. They lost or won the second set 9-7, and the third set 6-4. But can you imagine? Both of them hung over. They had to get in the pool to wake each other up, and they have a first set which lasts 46 games. Oh, man, that's crazy. Stolly had turned pro in 1967, continued to play in major tournaments through the 1970s. In 1981, he and John Newcomb made it all the way to the U.S. Open semifinals, where they lost to perpetual champions John McEnroe and Peter Fleming. Yeah, people forget that McEnroe, in addition to playing all those singles matches, played a lot of doubles. He was an excellent doubles player as well, and it was a different time in tennis. But I remember the ground floor of that, and in the early days of professional tennis, it really was professional tennis, just starting at that point, this late 60s, early 70s, and there used to be matches on public television, and they were hosted by this guy who I'd never heard of before, Bud Collins, and Bud Collins later became really the key man in tennis, and a wonderful guy as well. And he's the one in the loud pants and would always do the post-match interviews, and everybody loved him. And the tennis boom, people forget how big it was in the 1970s. Well, it was fueled by that. That was the beginning, when there wasn't a lot of sports on television, and we would see these matches, and we would see some of these great players. Like I saw a match that went on all afternoon between Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall, and it was riveting. But that was new stuff. Tennis is, fallen off because of all the other sports that are on TV. But back in the day, and especially when you had colorful characters like this and John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors and others, it was really something. All right, that's it for me. We'll talk more about the tournament as the week goes on. Get your brackets ready. Bram is coming up next, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.